Let's start this section by a brief overview of what we have in the collections framework. So the green boxes you see here are interfaces, and the blue boxes are classes that implement these interfaces. Now, don't worry about memorizing any of these. We're going to get back to this slide several times throughout this section. So at the top of this hierarchy, we have the iterable interface. This interface represents an object that can be used in a for each statement. So if we implement this interface in our generic list class, we'll be able to use it in a for each loop. I will show you how to do that later. Below that, we have the collection interface. This interface extends the iterable interface and adds additional functionality. It represents an object that can act like a container or a collection of objects. Now here's a question for you. What are the capabilities that we need in a collection? We should be able to add an object to a collection. We should be able to remove an object. We should be able to check for the existence of an object and so on. So these are the operations that the collection interface declares. If you search for Java collection interface, on this page, you can see all the operations that this interface declares. For example, we have add for adding an object, we have add all, we have clear, and so on. Now, below this collection interface, we have three sub-interfaces: list, queue, and set. Each of these, again, inherit all the capability declared in the collection interface and add something extra. For example, the list interface allows us to work with an ordered collection and access objects using their index, just like how we can access an object by its index in an array. Now, we have different implementations of this interface in the collections framework. The one that you would be using most of the time is the ArrayList class, which is an implementation of a dynamic array. So internally, it uses an array to store objects. If the array gets full, it will automatically resize the array. We have another implementation called linked list, which is based on the linked list data structure. The explanation of linked lists goes beyond the scope of this course. I've covered them in detail in my data structures and algorithms course. So we have two different implementations of the list interface. Again, most of the time you would be using the ArrayList class. The queue interface also extends the collection interface and provides additional operations for working with a queue of objects. We use queues in situations where we have a resource that can be shared amongst many consumers. A good example of this is the printer at your office. Different people can print different papers at the same time, but a printer is not going to be able to print them all simultaneously. So each job should go in a queue. The printer will then take these jobs one by one and process them. Now, in the collections framework, the class that implements the queue interface is called priority queue. We're going to look at that later in this section. And finally, we have the set interface, which represents a collection without duplicates. The class that implements this interface is called HashSet. So that was a very basic overview. Throughout this section, we're going to explore each of these building blocks in detail.